Good day to you. You know, globalization is a phenomenon that's taking place every single day of our lives. And in fact, to illustrate it right from the get-go, I'd like you to pause this video and check the label on your shirt or any other piece of clothing that you're wearing. Go ahead, we'll wait for you. And I want you to look at what country your clothing comes from. Okay, so where is your clothing from? I mean, you could have a shirt like I do, which was actually made, or I should say was the clothing part of it, the textile part of it was made in Cambodia, but it was actually assembled in Mexico and then sold at some store here in the United States. And we hardly ever think of that when we go to JCPenney or Aeropostale or wherever you do your shopping, that the stuff that we're seeing, that we're buying, is coming from places all over the world. People working away in those factories and those farms in those other countries. That's what globalization is. It's a worldwide phenomenon that is bringing the world closer together. And it's occurring through government, it's occurring through our legal system, it's occurring through business for sure, and it's occurring through social media. But business is the primary driver of globalization because the companies that are reaching overseas to market their products, including media companies like Disney shipping their products overseas, Disney films being seen in Sweden, for example, those companies are trying to maximize their profits. They're trying to gain a market share in other countries. And so globalization is being propelled primarily by business. But globalization is not a new phenomenon either. It actually can be traced back to slavery, if you want to look at it that way, in that very dark period of our human history, where the three main European powers of Britain, Holland, and Portugal, and Spain to some extent, they went to Africa and captured African slaves and then took them to the Caribbean, where those slaves were offloaded onto Caribbean islands to work on sugar plantations and banana plantations and coffee plantations. And then with the empty ships, those ships were then loaded with all the products, the sugar, the molasses, the rum, and taken to Europe, where they were offloaded and sold, and then the ships started back off to Africa again. It's known as the slavery triangle. It was an early form of globalization. And even a tiny country like Sweden, with only 8 million people, we have 340 million people here in the United States. Sweden has only 8 million people. Even a tiny country like that has its presence felt across the world, including here in the United States. Every Volvo automobile that you see on the road is made in Sweden. Every time you put on a pair of pants and pull up the zipper was invented in Sweden. When you pour some milk in a milk carton, the milk carton with that particular opening where you can open it up and it forms a little spout, that was made in Sweden. The three-point seatbelt harness that you have in your car, that was developed in Sweden. And it's also a mark of Sweden's emphasis on human safety, which is very big in Sweden, is safety of the human being. So even a small country like Sweden is swept up in globalization. We, however, are focusing on globalization in the context of media, and media being exported around the world. So let's continue on with this chapter now as we continue to get to know globalization from the vantage point of my book. And we want to talk now about 4 factors that stimulate globalization. Why is globalization really accelerating? Well, one is international travel. It's what we will all be doing on Friday. You know, years ago, it was much harder to book a trip overseas. You had to go through a travel agent. But today, because of all the websites that are out there, people can book their own flights. And a couple of you in this class are acting as your own travel agent, and you are arranging your own side trips during the course. And that's the amazing thing about international travel today. It is so easy to do. And also, more airplanes are landing at more airports. Having the choice of flying through Iceland is not a choice that we would have had many years ago for this class, but it's a choice today because there's so many more airplane routes that take us to places. So with people traveling around the world and getting dropped off in other countries and bringing the products with them that they have back home and meeting people and striking up new arrangements and business deals and friendships, international travel is propelling globalization. The next thing that's propelling globalization is communication technology. I'm talking about everything electronic, basically. I'm talking about your cell phone, which you carry every single day. I'm talking about your laptop. I'm talking about your iPad. I'm talking about any device that's powered by electricity that's communicating over the internet. And then I'm also talking about satellite TV. I'm talking about cable TV. I'm even talking about newspapers because they have a presence on websites. So because of communication technologies, all the gadgets that we have, we're in touch with people almost every single day. I want you to think about, if you have a Facebook account or a Snapchat account or an Instagram account, how many people on there are living in other countries right now? And when was the last time you saw them? If you didn't have that technology, you wouldn't be in touch with them as much as you are now. So it's also propelling globalization. Next up, propelling globalization, is the global media conglomerate. The huge companies that have many subdivisions and many smaller properties that are part of the empire. Disney is one of them. The News Corporation is one of them. Time Warner is another one of them. Another one of them, which you probably haven't heard of, is the Bertelsmann Company. That's a German company that got its start in music publishing and now owns most of the book publishing companies out there, as well as lots of other media properties, including a TV station right in London, a German TV station in London, Channel 5 as it is known. These companies have a reach like you wouldn't believe. Just think about every single day what you come into contact with Disney-wise. Do you run into cartoons? Do you see anything on the Disney Channel as you're skimming through? Have you seen a Disney movie? Do you watch ESPN Sports? Do you watch anything on ABC? All of those are Disney properties. So think about the extent to which those companies and all the other ones I've mentioned, as well as others, have an impact on your lives every single day because they are trying to find customers for their products. And you reach a certain number of people in the US, you can't go any higher. There's only a certain amount of people that will watch the Disney Channel. I'm not going to watch it. It's not within my interests or my age group. And so they have to reach for other people, and that's why they go overseas to find other markets for their products. So global media conglomerates are helping to propel globalization. And I'd like you to take a look at the chart in the book. Even though it will be out of date, it will show you in a snapshot how many media properties are owned by just a few companies. And actually the biggest media company of all is not even represented in the book because the landscape has changed so much. What do you think the biggest media company is out there today? Yeah, it's Google. Yeah, an internet company has the biggest media property holdings, including YouTube. That's what Google has. Finally, as a fourth factor that's stimulating globalization, we have audience curiosity. Curiosity for foreign things is kind of like getting to know coffee and to like coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I know that most people, the first time they try coffee, they don't like it. It's an acquired taste. And that's the same for foreign programming. One of the biggest turnoffs for somebody, if you have somebody over and you want to watch a movie and you say, I've got a foreign film, and they ask you, oh, does it have subtitles? You know, it's a turnoff. But it's something that once you get used to it, you actually start to crave. And we're seeing that on the part of every single person in this class. Otherwise, you wouldn't be wanting to go to a foreign country like Sweden. You have a curiosity about it. And so that's another factor that's stimulating globalization. Okay, but globalization, despite all the good things it's brought us, you know, cheap shirts like this, and coffee from Colombia, and TV programs, funny TV programs from Britain, despite all the good things that globalization is bringing us, there are a lot of criticisms of globalization as well. So let's talk about three of those. These are offered both by practitioners, people in the media, and also by academics like myself. So the very first criticism is that globalization is causing a homogenization of media. Homogenization, homo means same. So homogenization means the content in media has a lot of sameness to it. And so, for example, think of the formula behind American Idol. Did you know that American Idol started out as a TV show that was developed by that Bertelsmann Company I told you in England? And originally that show was called Pop Idol, and that show was aired in Britain. Well, Fox got wind of the formula for that show, and it decided to import it and to purchase the copyright license to do that, and it renamed it American Idol, making it have a patriotic flair to it. But the same basic structure of the show is there. You have contestants, they're voted on, they get feedback, there's some outrageous statements that are made, some young people with raw talent that maybe go on, like Kelly Clarkson and so on, to become famous singers. Now that show is all over the world, but guess what? It has a lot of sameness to it. It has the same structure in it with the same idea of 3 panelists and 3 judges. And we can see that with almost every genre that's out there. Reality TV shows. The show Survivor has been on the U.S. for many, many years. That is actually a Swedish show. A Swedish show that was started out, it was named Robinson Crusoe. You know, the famous fable about a person getting stranded on an island. And so the sameness that's out there is blocking a lot of original content. That's one of the reasons that college radio, and particularly WESS radio here at East Stroudsburg University, which I advise, that's one of the reasons that it has a big niche today in radio listening around this area, because all the other radio out there is a lot of sameness. I mean, how many times do you turn on the radio and you're going to hear Bruno Mars every single day? This is what radio has become in many ways because of the homogenization of it. You see, when big companies own media properties, they want to minimize risk. They don't want to roll out a TV show that's going to be a flop. They don't want to roll out a radio station with a format that nobody listens to, so they stick with what works, and that's where we get sameness. Now let's move on to the second criticism of globalization, and that is what is known as unfairness in global information flow. Unfairness in global information flow. When was the last time that you saw a positive report on Syria? Syria, almost 100% of news reports or any information coming out of Syria is about the civil war in Syria, about the rebellion, about Russia and the U.S. fighting over strategy. Of course, there is a peace agreement that was announced that it was reached between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin last week. I guess you could count that as good news. But Syria would probably say, you know, this is so unfair. It's so unfair because we're a tiny country, and we're not getting to represent the good part of Syria. You know, Syria has some beautiful countryside. Do you ever see that countryside in anything having to do with Syria? No, it's all war-torn areas. And so there's an unfairness that a lot of mostly smaller countries allege is going on, in that they are being represented in the flow of information that goes around the world in news reports and TV shows and films, and they're being represented in a way that portrays them not only negatively, but the volume of information that's portraying them is just a trickle. It's kind of like if you have a friend, and that friend just talks about themselves all the time, and there's very little questioning. Hey, what are you up to? What do you think? The friend is always bringing the conversation back to themselves, and they're starting most of their sentences with I this, I that, I this, I that. That's kind of getting at the same idea behind the volume of information flow, that it's mostly one direction. And so a lot of countries have reacted against this. They've taken it into the form of the United Nations through a sub-body within the United Nations called UNESCO, and they've tried to make complaints in a way to get big media conglomerates to change how they report on other countries. So CNN, for example, has responded to this by trying at least to use reporters from the countries themselves to report on when those countries are being reported on. So instead of sending an American reporter to Nicaragua or Colombia, they tried to use a Colombian reporter to report on that country. That's one of the ways that fairness can be restored. Just think about that. If I say the word Lebanon, what images come to your mind? More war-torn stuff, right? And yet Lebanon, this tiny country that also has had problems with war, that has beautiful beaches and beautiful ski areas. It's one of those countries that they say that you can ski in the morning and go swimming in the afternoon at the beach. But do you ever hear about that? No, you don't, because of this problem in global information flow. All right, that brings us to the last criticism of globalization. It's called cultural imperialism. You know what imperialism is? The old definition of imperialism was where a country used military might to go into another country and take over that country because it's a bigger country. It can force the will of that country on the smaller country. Well, that's imperialism. It's taking over that country and bringing with it the culture of the dominating country. The new imperialism, called cultural imperialism, but also sometimes called electronic colonialization or electronic imperialism, is a kind of invasion that takes place on the part of electronic media coming into a country and all the cultural traditions that come with the people represented in the content taking over the home country's traditions and rituals. Let me put it to you like this. If you watch American television, every single night you're going to see a ton of ads for fast food. Whether it's Arby's or Wendy's or McDonald's or Burger King, there's a ton of ads. Now, when you go to eat fast food, you eat it in a very particular way. There's a reason that it's called fast food. There's a reason why a place sells burritos that just happen to fit in the cup holder of your car. It's because it's combining eating with being on the go. It's combining eating with eating really quickly because you don't have time for it. Well, guess what? In France, they traditionally have a very different way of eating. If you go to France, you're likely going to say, boy, the service here is terrible. But not really. That's cultural myopia. In France, if you go out to eat, it's expected that you're going to relax. This is a special time for you to have conversation with who you're with. The waiter or the waitress is not trying to move you off that table to get to the next tip. That's your time. So the waiter wants to give you some time to get relaxed and get settled before they come over and interrupt you with asking you for what drinks that you want. That's why there are 3 or 4 courses of meals in France. You have a beginning course and a second course and a third course. You're supposed to space out that meal so your stomach is not all tense and you're able to digest the food. And actually, at the end of a French meal, you get what's commonly called a digestive drink. It's like a kind of flavored vodka, and you just sip it. It's like one shot worth, and it dissolves the food in you so that your body processes the food and you're not gaining weight. Okay, so France gets a lot of American TV shows. You can watch American TV all night long in France, and of course, many Hollywood films. So think about all these international fast food ads that are coming with the American TV shows, and think about what those fast food ads are starting to teach young people in France about how to consume food. It's doing away with the French tradition of that long meal. This is an example of cultural imperialism. It's where an invading culture, often the United States, often perceived to be the United States, often perceived to be the UK, 2 big exporters of media content from around the world. Those cultures, when they export their media, they are also exporting their values. And the home countries, they don't want, the ones that are complaining about cultural imperialism, they don't want to lose those cultural traditions. That's why in France, they have quotas on how much French programming has to be produced. That there has to be a certain percentage of radio programming that is produced in France if you're going to air that programming on a French radio station. Is to protect the French culture. That's cultural imperialism. We'll check that out when we go to Sweden, when we walk around the towns, and we'll see the beautiful architecture, and then we'll see what kinds of American businesses are there, what kind of German businesses are there, what kind of Spanish businesses are there, what kind of Russian businesses are in Sweden, and how are those businesses different in the architecture, the look and the feel, and ultimately the way that they affect people's behavior inside of Sweden. It's a kind of invasion that we'll be taking a look at when we walk around during the course. So that's it for Globalization in Chapter 2. Have a great day.